Hi, Dr. Posey. This is my presentation on developmental learning theories, particularly Erikson's theories. So let's get started. First, I'm going to talk a bit about the psychosocial development theory. So this theory was influenced by Freud's theory, actually, and it's based on the idea that culture and society really influence a child's development. But what's different from Freud's theory is that Freud says that children or people develop throughout their childhood, whereas Erikson says that people continue to grow and develop throughout their whole life. And Erikson says that there is a constant conflict between individuals and the needs of society, and that a person must complete the 8 stages of development in order to have a healthy personality. So the first stage of those 8 stages is trust versus mistrust. It's the first stage, and it happens in the first year of life. As soon as a child is born, they begin this stage. And in this stage, basically, a baby looks towards their caregiver, which is generally their mom or dad. And if they receive care consistently, then the baby is able to develop the sense of trust and safety and security. And it helps them develop a virtue of hope. So basically, like if a crisis were to occur, then they would know that others would be there to help them and support them. But if babies don't develop this virtue, then basically they'll feel constantly suspicious of others around them and will have trouble trusting others because they weren't able to develop that virtue. So that's trust versus mistrust. And then the second stage is autonomy versus shame. So this stage occurs from around 18 months to 3 years. This is when children really begin to assert their independence from their parents. They begin making choices for themselves, like choosing their own food, toys, walking away from their parents, things like that. So basically, children must be given this opportunity to explore in a supportive and safe environment, but the parent must also protect the child and support them from any sort of failure. So there's kind of a balance there. But if a child is overly controlled or not supported in their exploration, then they may begin to develop like a shame in their abilities. So that is autonomy versus shame. And then we have initiative versus guilt. So that occurs from the age of 3 to 5. At this age, children really begin to play with others and develop these social skills, and they feel secure in their ability to interact with others and meet other people, and they begin to ask a lot of questions, which we've all seen. Like children like to ask why a lot when they're young, and they kind of begin to develop a sense of purpose. But if these questions that they're asking constantly are met with any sort of annoyance or criticism from their parents or their teachers, children will start to feel a sense of guilt, like they're being annoying. So that is initiative versus guilt. So the next stage is going to be industry versus inferiority. So this occurs from age 6 to 12 years old. And during this stage, children kind of begin to feel a little bit more significant, and they develop self-esteem, and essentially they just start to try to win approval from others by showing off their accomplishments to show that they're competent. So if children are encouraged during this stage, then they begin to feel a sort of confidence. But if they're not encouraged, children really start to feel inferior and hindered. So there's also a balance here because some failure is normal. We don't want people to be, too confident in their abilities and feel like they are invincible, but we also want, we want people to be modest. So there's some failure is normal and healthy to develop like the sense of modesty, but then too much of that can be a bad thing and children can really start to feel inferior. So there's a balance there as well. And then the next one is identity versus role confusion. This stage occurs from the age of 12 to 18 years old. During this stage, children become a little bit more independent, and they start to kind of figure out their future plans, what they want to do after high school, things like that. So children, they want to feel as though they are important to society, and the child kind of starts to really examine who they are and figure out who they'll be in society and what role they'll play in society. So they really begin to explore some possible outcomes and who they will become. So basically, if children aren't given the chance to properly explore, they can really start to feel a sense of confusion about who they want to be. So This is where the identity and role confusion name comes from. And then the next stage is intimacy versus isolation. So this stage occurs from 18 to 40, and during this stage we kind of share who we are with others and kind of develop like more intimate relationships with people, start to get closer to people. So this intimacy can either lead to a healthy, successful relationship where we feel really comfortable with other people and have close relationships. But if we avoid sharing who we really are, then we can also start to feel a sense of isolation and unhappiness and loneliness. So that is intimacy versus isolation. And then the seventh stage is generativity versus stagnation. So this stage occurs from age 40 to around retirement, so around 65. During this stage, people start to kind of feel secure in relationships, and family becomes the center of people's lives. And people start to really feel like they are a part of society, and they feel like they're giving to society through the work that they're doing at their jobs every day or raising their children. And then a failure in this stage would be a sense of feeling stuck or unproductive, so feeling like you're really not giving back to society. Your work isn't meaningful, or you're not raising children, things like that. So, and then we have the last stage, which is integrity versus despair. So this stage occurs from 65 to death. And at this stage, people kind of start to think back on their lives, and they feel either a satisfaction with their lives or a dissatisfaction with what they've accomplished. And this sense of satisfaction can either lead to a sense of wisdom, and that feeling of wisdom and satisfaction leads to the ability to accept death and cope with it. But a sense of dissatisfaction with life leads to feelings of despair. So if somebody doesn't feel accomplished with their life, then they might have feelings of despair and not be able to cope with death. So that would be integrity versus despair. So yeah, as you can see, this Eriksons theory is basically saying people are constantly developing all throughout their life. So I think that's a really interesting theory. And then moving on to social and emotional development. So essentially, this theory deals with children being able to understand and manage their emotions so that they can build these satisfying, healthy relationships with people around them. It involves the ability to recognize one's own emotions, be able to kind of read the emotions of other people around them, to manage and regulate one's own emotions and behaviors, and to develop a sense of empathy. And then with all this comes the ability to build relationships, build meaningful relationships. So a bit about social emotional development. There's the idea of responsive caregiving. So essentially this allows infants to develop their emotions and provides them with a sense of safety and security. So these healthy relationships with parents allow infants to grow and develop because they feel safe and secure. It also allows children to feel emotionally safe and a sense of emotional security. So infants and children essentially rely on adults for a bunch of different things. Some of them are social approval, emotional regulation, relieving their distress, and feeling safe. So communication with a mother and infant can really influence influence a child's emotional regulation and a child's temperament. And the ways that children display their emotions influence how their relationships form. So essentially, responsive caregiving can really make or break how a child is able to deal with their emotions and build relationships later on in life. So a bit more about social emotional development. That emotional regulation that I talked about essentially just helps children figure out appropriate ways to act in emotional situations. And this may vary across cultures. What is appropriate in one culture may be not appropriate in another. So that's important to keep in mind. And then there's the idea of impulse control. So essentially it helps children gain control over their actions. When babies have a need, they start to cry. So they have no impulse control, but as children get a little bit older, they're able to kind of develop this impulse control and kind of be a little bit more patient while they're waiting for their needs to be met. So it's really important. It helps children follow the rules and adapt in certain social situations. So it's really important. And then social understanding. So during this, children essentially begin to understand why others around them are behaving in a certain way, and they kind of are able to know what to expect from social interactions, which is really important. I mean, as we go about our day, it's important. I mean, we kind of know what to expect when we interact with somebody, and how a general social interaction goes with people. So that's really important. And then a bit more. So interactions with peers plays a really important role. It's not just interaction with a parent. These interactions with peers can teach children about problem solving, cooperating with others, and also help them develop empathy. Children's relationship with the world around them and how they see themselves in the world around them is also really important. They're able to begin to understand their roles and relationships to others, and their role in their family and in their classroom, things like that. And then lastly, we have a sense of self-efficacy. Also gives children a feeling that they can make things happen and that they're good at things. So if a child doesn't develop that sense of self-efficacy, they might start to, kind of have a low self-esteem and feel kind of down. So yeah, that's a bit about Erikson's theories.